Welcome to Mystery Us. I'm Tony Pratt, your host for Mystery Us. And on this edition of Mystery Us, our guest is Paul Von Ward. Paul is an interdisciplinary cosmologist and independent scholar who is the author of several books, including Our Solarian Legacy, Gods, Genes, and Consciousness, and his latest work is The Soul Genome, Science and Reincarnation. Welcome to Mystery Us, Paul.
Thank you very much,
How are you
Tony.
doing?
I'm happy to be here.
Great. Paul, most of the ideas about reincarnation in the past have involved some kind of religious belief or concepts that are of a spiritual or mystical nature. In your book, you explore the possibility that reincarnation could be a natural phenomena and universal aspect of Homo sapiens' physical and conscious evolution. What evidence led you to pursue a scientific explanation of reincarnation?
Well, I think there's a lot of evidence, and what I do in the book is I introduce a number of areas of evidence that I think support the notion of reincarnation that most people don't think about in terms of reincarnation. Usually, as you mentioned in your introduction there, people think of reincarnation in terms of some ethereal spirit, the soul that somehow has nothing to do with daily living, but incarnates human beings at the time of birth or at the time of conception. Those beliefs vary.
Right.
And that somehow it comes in and the soul has an experience living through a human. In other words, the human is somehow different from the soul that was reincarnated. But about 50 years ago, a psychiatrist at the University of Virginia named Ian Stevenson began to take a scientific approach and collect stories of children who were alleged to have memories of previous lives, and they knew things about people who'd lived before. They knew facts about locations, about incidents that happened in the lives of these people who are now deceased.
Sure.
And he found in India, in Asia, in the Middle East, in Europe, and the United States, many cases, about 3,000, between 2,500 and 3,000 cases of people where these memories could actually be validated, meaning that the information that these children had could be confirmed as reflecting events in the past.
Right.
Now, that doesn't prove reincarnation, but it's suggestive of the lifetime in the past somehow transmitting into the present lifetime this information and knowledge. He also found physical similarities between these children and their alleged previous lives. So this was the first real scientific effort to gather data that was empirical. You had pictures, you had measurements, you had recordings, you had documents, all of these things that science can do something with. And he died last year in 2007. But some time before he died, he began to review all of this data that he had, all this information, and he said, I've got all this evidence of this happened in the past, these people in the present know it, these people in the present resemble those people in the past. What is the explanation?
Yeah.
And so his thought was, maybe it's something like a container, and he used a Greek term called psychophore, a container that sort of carries it. Now, he didn't really have a lot of experience with some of the new areas of research in biology and physics, which suggests that all physical organisms have these energetic patterns, have information that are in a field that is not physical, but it accompanies the physical life of a person, the life of an insect, or some other species. All living species have this field. So as I began to do research on reincarnation, to do a different kind of book some years ago, I reread. I had met Ian 15, 20 years ago when he was doing the work back in the early 90s. I reread his work, and then I read some other books of cases of people who had the same kind of evidence. And I found that in looking at all these cases, there were about 5 different categories of empirical information that you could look at and identify it, evaluate it. I could look at it, a third party could look at it, and we could talk about it. These were not just memories or dreams or ideas that came out of a hypnotic session that only the person who had them could say, this is what I had. Now, that doesn't mean that some of those memories and things aren't valid, but you couldn't test them yourself. I couldn't test them. So I began to calculate sort of the areas based on a lot of the best cases that are out there, and I found that there was a whole set of physical features that seemed to carry forward from the previous life to this lifetime. And there were
physical bodily
features,
characteristics.
Bodily character. Well, one of them we call physical architecture, which really is the bone structure.
Is this the biometrics?
The biometrics that I mentioned in our earlier discussion. This is where scientists have found that the genetic stability of certain things in our body seem to carry through the whole lifetime, despite changes in health and other conditions. That's the physical architecture, the way, the proportions of our nose and eyes and
Not to mention
chin.
different parents. I mean, you would think you would just have the characteristics of your parents.
You don't. You have general resemblances in most cases, but what biometrics has done, and biometrics we might just mention, is what security firms now use to take a picture of your face and have the picture in the computer, and then if you show up at the door and want to get into a secure location, they compare your face and the picture of you in the computer, and they measure all these dimensions and say, you look close enough to the picture in our computer, we'll let you in the door.
Right.
So I used that technology to measure faces of people. I didn't use the computer technology because we were doing cases that involved people with photographs and portraits from previous lifetimes, or old photographs that weren't digital in the previous lifetime. So you had the physical characteristics, not just the faces, but the body type, the hair patterns, the ear forms, the hand-finger proportions, and these characteristics, along with voice, seem to be stable. Finger types, the color of your eyes, what race you are, which sex you are, may change or seems to change from these past lives to the present ones. Then we looked at the mental factor, the way we think, how we analyze, how we synthesize information, what we do about information that we have. That's a whole pattern. And you can use psychological IQ tests and other tests to compare past lives and present lives. There was a great deal of correspondence in my strong cases. Same thing about emotions. Same thing about the way we interact with other people. The extrovert, introvert dichotomy in emotions, the person who's anxious all the time or the person who's calm all the time. In other words, you evaluate people on all these factors and compare the previous life to this life. And the strongest cases we had in our pilot study, which we have been conducting for the last couple of years and are now going to continue with other cases and new cases from the public.
Right.
You have evidence that anyone can look at and say, this person seems more like that person who lived 100 years ago or 50 years ago than anybody else who's living today. And so that degree of correspondence is pretty powerful evidence. There's some sort of carry forward.
Right.
And I call it the psychoplasm. It's a little bit different from Stevenson's term.
Psychophore.
Psychophore was container.
Right.
But it's more than a container. It's your physical DNA, the genotype. It's your memories, it's your knowledge, it's your emotional states, your emotional predispositions, all of these things that make us a real person. I call it the whole package.
Okay, so you call this model the